Okay, so thank you much. You heard the discussion of should we give IV thrombolytics in large vessel occlusion prior to mechanic thrombectomy in the morning. So we discussed the pros and the cons, and the guidelines currently is we should give it. And I would like to, according to Kung's wish, change the topic to exactly this, because we did a meta-analysis of this in the meantime. So, which might be relevant for the guidelines in the future. So current guidelines might change. So since 2014, we know that mechanic thrombectomy is highly efficient. And this has been tested the way that the gold standard was given, IV lytics, and on top mechanic thrombectomy. And IV alone is not as efficient as IV plus mechanic thrombectomy. But this is historically grown because IV lytics was the gold standard. This was the setting. So the gold standard was peripheral occlusions, IV lytics, proximal occlusions, no contraindication within 4.5 hours, IV lytics plus mechanic thrombectomy, and beyond that, mechanic thrombectomy. That is what most of you might practice today. However, the question always rises, is it worth to apply IV lytics? Because it might improve, it has some benefit, it might improve outcome, it might improve recausation rate, but on the other hand, it might increase hemorrhages. You heard the discussion this morning, and especially symptomatic intrahemorrhage, and it costs money. It costs money and time to apply it. So is it worth it? So the question is, the new paradigm might be peripheral occlusion, IV lytics, proximal occlusion, endovascular therapy only. And this has been tested. Just to be very clear on this, there are two different patient populations if you want to study stroke. One patient population is the patient that comes to an outside hospital, receives IV lytics, and then comes to your place. So drip and ship. And that's a common way. And you can randomize patients going directly, and this is not what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about drip and ship patients that could have received IV lytic outside, but I'm going to talk about mothership patients. So they come to Kanto, they come to Da Nang, they come to Ho Chi Minh City, directly to the stroke center, and you have to decide whether you would like to give IV lytics, yes or no. So you randomize them, IV lytics plus mechanic thrombectomy, gold standard, versus direct mechanic thrombectomy. And you might have heard that there are a couple of trials which have finished all within the last year, 6 of them in total. And while these trials were running, all the PIs of the studies already agreed that we were going to pool the data. And this is what I'm going to present right now. So I was involved in SWIFT Direct, together with the global co-PI was Fisher. There has been Direct Safe, DEBT, SKIP, and you see all the different nations. All these 6 trials were in the end pooled into one analysis, which is called IRIS. So it's the IRIS network. And you can see that although these trials were in different countries, in China, Japan, China, Europe, North America, Europe, Australia, including Vietnam, so it covers different patient populations, but the study protocol was pretty similar. So I think it's worth to go through the data. And it's called the IRIS analysis. I again want to emphasize mothership patients only. Coming to your hospital, you have to decide, do you want to give IV lytics, yes or no? And the idea was to prove that endovascular therapy is either superior or non-inferior to bridging concept. So you can skip IV and you get the same result. That was the idea of that study. And actually it's accepted, it's going to be published, and we got the date for the publication from the Lancet yesterday, so 22nd of August it'll be online. You will see all the data of the first part of this presentation. So what is non-inferiority? And so if you have 2 comparable treatment arms, bridging versus direct mechanic thrombectomy, what would you consider as non-inferior? A difference of 5%, 10%, 15%? And there is no common agreement on that, so we went out to the community and asked, what would you say? And the vast majority said 5%. So we said 5% difference. If it's below that, it's non-inferior. And these are results. First of all, the baseline characteristics. So now we have approximately 1,200 patients in each arm. Direct mechanic thrombectomy versus bridging thrombolysis. So quite a large number of patients in these trials. Altogether. You see that if you look at age, baseline characteristics, NHSS, aspect score, these are pretty well balanced arms. So I think it's, whatever the result will be, it seems to be quite valid. This brings us to the results. Few patients have to be excluded because of basal artery occlusion. And this is the modified ranking score after 90 days. So upper column, direct mechanical thrombectomy, lower one, bridging thrombolysis plus mechanical thrombectomy. And without great calculations, you can say there is no great difference. So whatever IV does, it does not cause a tremendous difference to the outcome of those patients. But if you look at the odds ratio, it is actually above our margin of non-inferiority. So yes, from the study design, we cannot prove that mechanical thrombectomy is non-inferior. So it's a bit tricky. I'll come to that in a second, because the data itself is pretty convincing. So if you look at the 90 days functional independence, you have 49% of functional independence with mechanical thrombectomy alone on 51% with bridging thrombolysis. So if you apply thrombolysis, you get a difference of 2% of modified veins carry 0 to 2. That's not a lot, but there is an effect. It's not a huge effect. Successful reperfusion, yes, it's a bit higher, about 4%, but any kind of recanalization prior to mechanical thrombectomy, very low in both arms. So IV lytics does not help you to recanalize large vessel occlusions. So mechanical thrombectomy is the one to recanalize, and IV lytics has a minor effect. I'm going to go through this shortly. So if you look at the modified ranking score, you see two things. This is the overall modified ranking score. And we are not able to prove that we can claim non-inferiority. At the same time, IV lytics cannot claim to be superior. So it is an inconclusive meta-analysis. You have no superiority of IV thrombolysis, and you can't claim non-inferiority for mechanical thrombectomy. This is exactly the setting that you have. You're crossing both borders. You're crossing the 5% border. You're crossing the confidence interval. So it's an inconclusive. You can give IV lytics. It's not superior. You cannot give IV lytics, and you can't prove non-inferiority. Just shortly, about hemorrhages, there is a tendency for less hemorrhages if you don't give IV lytics. The same for symptomatic intracranial hemorrhage. If you don't give lytics, the hemorrhage rate is lower. This is not surprising. Mortality, there is no difference. Successful reperfusion seems to be a little bit higher with IV lytics. And then the interesting thing comes actually in here, and I'm going to focus on this on the last part. If you apply lytics in an early time window, it has more effect after onset of the symptoms than in a later time window. And that's surprising, isn't it? So the earlier you give it, the more effect you have. The later you give it, the less effect you have. Or mechanical thrombectomy is more efficient suddenly, which you see there. And that's something we're going to focus on in the next second. So in conclusion of this meta-analysis, direct endovascular therapy is not non-inferior. It's tricky, but that's statistics, on the basis of a 5% margin. At the same time, we cannot prove that IVs prior to endovascular therapy is beneficial. So no superiority as well. There is a higher rate of reperfusion using lytics. At the same time, you cause more hemorrhages. And the benefit of IV lytics on top of mechanical thrombectomy is small. It's 2%. Historically seen, if we would have had mechanical thrombectomy first, and now we would investigate IV lytics as the new drug, we would not take it because you can't prove superiority. So it's historically a tricky situation. If you don't give lytics, the number need to harm is 57. So if you treat 57 patients without IV, one will have a worse outcome. So it's not very effective. And you see this time effect. In clinical implication, this means IV lytics has a small effect, but is that cost effective? We don't know. The effect of IV lytics is 2% on top of mechanical thrombectomy, but in mechanical thrombectomy on top of IV lytics is 20%. So the backbone of large vessel occlusions in mothership patients is mechanical thrombectomy, not IV lytics. So yes, you can give IV lytics to patients, but most importantly, IV lytics should not delay or prohibit endovascular treatment. This is what I want to present on the iris analysis, but we did one more analysis, and that might now show the full picture. We are inconclusive, and that's always a bit of pity, because what should you draw from 2,500 patients if you can't come to a conclusion? So now, if you look at randomized controlled trials on IV only, you see that there's a time-dependent effect. You might know this curve. And now we have the tendency of a time-dependent effect of IV lytics prior to mechanical thrombectomy as well. So if we go into more detail, and this is what we did in the meantime, Johannes Kersmacher did this and it's under review, we compare patients receiving IV lytics and those not receiving IV lytics. And we looked at the time when IV lytics was given after onset of symptoms. Obviously, those who received IV lytics, we have the time in the randomized control trials. The other ones didn't, so we had to calculate it. We had to calculate the estimated time when they would have received IV lytics. So both arms have approximate time. This looks like this statistically. So now you have two arms, and on both arms you can calculate what the effect of IV lytics is time dependent. And the results are the following. If you have applied prior to mechanical thrombectomy, the bridging concept, the lytics within a time window of 2 hours and 15 minutes, it's superior. So superiority is proven if it's applied early. Within the first 2 hours, 50 minutes, IV lytics is effective, highly effective. You see the shift in modified ranking scale. If you are beyond the time window of 2 hours and 50 minutes, there is no effect of lytics anymore. And that's quite striking because it basically means IV lytics in mothership concept absolutely makes sense and is superior within 2 hours and 50 minutes. And after that, most likely it's a waste of time and money. It looks like this. So basically, this is the same curve again. You see 135 minutes, 2 hours, 50 minutes. You have superiority of IV versus mechanical thrombectomy alone. Bridging thrombolysis is superior. After that, there is no superiority, cannot be established. And that's quite interesting because this will be intensely discussed when it comes to guidelines. So do you have to apply IV lytics in the future according to guidelines beyond 2 hours, 50 minutes when the patient comes to your hospital? Discussable, but according to this data, questionable. If you have good reason not to give it, maybe in the guidelines it'll change. You can also calculate the number need to treat. So how many patients do you have to treat to have one favorable outcome with IV lytics? And you see the same thing. Within the first 60 minutes, IV lytics highly effective. You have to treat 8 patients to have one favorable outcome. After 90 minutes, you go around 10. After 120 minutes, you're around 15. 150 minutes, around 20. And then 180 minutes, it shoots up. So you have to treat 50 patients to have one favorable outcome. So IV lytics, highly time dependent. From there, I'm going to cut the story short. There's a lot to say about this, but I'm going to conclude on this. So according to this data, the effect of IV lytics before mechanical thrombectomy is time dependent. The later after onset, the less the effect is, and after 2 hours, 50 minutes, there's almost no effect anymore. The decision to administer IV lytics, therefore, should take into account this time window, because the overall effect is diminishing. And superiority, and that's important now, we have superiority. Superiority of IV lytics is within the 2 hours, 50 minutes, and after that, the effect is minimal. I just want to share this with you because it's pretty recent data, and it's unlikely that we'll have a couple of meta-analyses because the randomized trials are closed, and this will go into guideline discussion one day. Right now, yes, we're following all the guidelines, but if you follow the evidence, it should be taken into account as well. Thank you very much.